Right. We're in our last lecture here of the course. Next one will just be a review, and then I'll give you my 2 cents after the final, and that'll be that. So this week we're discussing, how to get through a successful job interview. So interviewing is a perishable skill, right? You need to practice interviewing in order to avoid anxiety. Anytime I've ever interviewed, yes, there's always been a level of anxiety, so you have to prepare, right? Preparing is about the best way to do that. So you develop your skills anytime you're good at something, right? So interviewing is no different. The more you can prepare yourself for the interview, the better off you're going to be. And so let's dive into some ways and how you can prepare for an interview. Why do we do interviews? Obviously, it's just how you can determine who is the best candidate for the position that they are applying for. Um, Interviews are a chance for you to highlight your abilities, interests, motivations, work experience, education, and just anything that you feel is relevant to the position that you're applying for. You don't want to be throwing out a whole bunch of stuff at them that doesn't necessarily pertain to the position that you're applying for. Um, and so all of that information is going to be used, to determine are you the best employee for that job. Okay, so a couple types of different interviews that they do. It's a direct interview or an indirect interview. In the direct interview, they're going to have basically like a list of questions that they ask you and the other candidates that are very specific, right? If everyone on that interview who's being interviewed is going to be asked the same set of questions. And that can be in a one-on-one setting or it can be in a panel setting. With the indirect interview types, it's, like I said, tell me about yourself. And it's not structured. And so um, if you're having to use like a matrix in order to determine who's the most qualified candidate for the position, the direct style of interview is going to be the way they go. You also have a behavioral style interview, and a lot of times you could get this type of questioning that just they want to know how you react to problem solving or how do you deal with conflict amongst other fellow employees. They just want to know that you're going to be a good fit. They don't necessarily care that you're the very best at doing whatever task that you're applying for. It's more, do you work well in a team? The other type is a practical, and this can be included. So you can have like a combination of the types of interviews that we've talked about, where you're going to have a practical and then you're going to have also a direct or behavioral type interview. But the practical is basically just a simulation. It's basically either a written exam on, hey, do you know how to solve these problems? Can you look at a set of plans and identify these characteristics? Or it could be something in the field where it's like, hey, dig up this meter box, or reconnect or drop in a meter, or something, something pertaining to the job itself. With the practical interview, though, it most always have to pertain to the job. It can't be stuff that does not pertain to that job. Almost all water agencies, actually every government job I've ever applied for, has been a panel. So there's several people who um, may or may not have experience in the position that you are applying for. Um, sometimes what happens is if you have all internal candidates, depending on like the level of the position, they may have to bring in one or two outside panelists just to show that there's no internal bias when they're making their selection. But the panel, interview, basically it's you on one side of the table and then, three or four people on the other side of the table. And again, it's kind of like that direct interview where they're asking a set of questions. So, it's going to be the same set of questions for everyone. Um, and so, yeah, of course, you want to maintain eye contact. You want to, look at each of these individuals as they're asking you the question. Another one's a tag team interview, and obviously they want cooperation, so it's a series of one-on-one interviews. And so this could be like, you know, you with like a senior in the department yet that you would be working in, and then you with the manager that you would be working under. And so that's kind of how the tag team style goes. Another type of interview could just be a field interview, and that's where they're, trying to get that interpersonal skills. How do you treat other people? When they're asking you questions, is there thoughtful questions, that maybe you could respond with? You know, just how you treat that, interviewer. Are you taking cues from them? Are you being respectful? That's kind of how a field interview would go. So if you make it through the first interview, sometimes they've selected a few different candidates to move on, and so there's going to be a follow-up interview. And a lot of times they've gotten the technical sense that you can perform the job in the first interview. So then in that second follow-up interview, again, it kind of goes back to that behavioral style interview. Are you a fit? Do you fit well within our organization? And so, yeah, there might be some more in-depth questions, but they just want to get a better sense of you and try to, differentiate the one or the two or three different people that maybe they brought back in for follow-up interviews. And then lastly, here you got a telephone interview. Um, I've only done one of those. Actually, it was over Zoom. And so you want to make sure that you've isolated yourself from every kind of distraction. I wear, dress up like you would if you were going to an interview. They did ask me to stand up and prove that I was, you know, wearing pants. And so thankfully I was. But yeah, you want to be also cognizant of what, if it's over a Zoom, what's behind you, is there anything that could be behind you that would distract the interviewer? So just things to pay attention to. Some ways to prepare for the interview, right? This is what's going to take to make you successful. um, Gather up some of your work history. If you are applying for a job that you know requires some of the work history that you've currently done, then make sure you brush up on that. Always a good idea to rehearse some answers. Um, if you do an internet search for, types of questions, I've gone into an interview once where it just so happened that the interview or the interview questions that I had researched on the internet actually was almost verbatim the questions that I was asked during the interview. So it was, kind of surprising to me. Typically, as an interview starts off, they're gonna just throw some softball questions out there. Why do you want the job? What makes you think you're the right candidate? Just to kind of warm you up prior to getting into the more technical questions for the position. You could research your employer, right? The one that you are looking to be employed by. Um, just about every company has a website, obviously. That's likely how you heard about the position. And so on that website, scour it, go through everything. What is their mission statement? What kind of job or organizational chart do they have? Is there any information on their website about the position that you're applying for that could be useful during, just useful information that you could relay during the interview. And then, of course, you could go see if there's anything else outside the web as well. So here I've got an example of Sweetwater Authority's website. If you go onto it, you could see that, there's a lot of stuff in there. However, you've got governing board. You could say about us, right? What's the latest news update here? There's a lot of information just on their homepage here that could be useful during an interview. So here, you could see this is, the people. Do you recognize any of them? Um, you know, Obviously, there's a lot of information here, the management team, their calendars, education, job opportunity, yeah, bid results, history. There's a lot of information that could be useful that you can gain prior to going into your interview, right? Here's, water supply, quality, facilities, fishing. There's a lot of information there that will be really helpful. Right, the do's and don'ts. So obviously there's the obvious ones, not chewing gum, not swearing, using slang, you don't want to ramble. Um, before you go into it says formulate your answers before beginning to speak. There's a method, it's the star method. I think I talk about it a little bit later on, and it's a way to answer questions. And then it's okay to be slightly funny in your interview, that way they know that you're a real person, but you're not trying to be a comedian. When you walk in there, you want to firmly shake the hands, maybe not break their hands, but a firm handshake is always appreciated, not a dead fish. You want to greet everyone that's going to be a part of the process and be friendly to them. They're going to give you a set of instructions initially before walking in there. Be sure to follow those. Everything is a test, right? So um, make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on around you. Obviously, posture is important. You don't want to be slunched over. You don't want to, be, looking down. Recently, there was interviews at the place where I work where one of the guys didn't make eye contact with anybody. And it's just little things like that. I know it can be uncomfortable, but if you don't do those things, it's not likely that you're going to get the position. Um, Women, obviously, you want your legs to be crossed. Not you're probably sitting at a table though, so honestly, they shouldn't be able to see that anyway. Um, yeah, you can have your hands folded in front of you, or they could be on your lap, whatever. Sit up straight though. That's a big one. I've interviewed a lot of people, and posture is a real big thing, honestly. You'd be surprised, how well they pick up on that kind of stuff. Um, and then there's just the fidgety stuff. You want to avoid that fidgety stuff as best you can. I know it's difficult, but yeah, right. So during the interview, you obviously want to be on time. There's only been one interview where I completely forgot I had an interview, and they were calling me asking me where I was, and yeah, let's just say I didn't get the job. Um, Obviously, you want to be friendly, show some kind of enthusiasm as a eye contact. Like I said before, if you're just staring down the whole time, you're not likely showing that confidence that you need that you're the right person for the position. Um, your body language is a big thing, and then you want to emphasize your strengths. That's the whole point of the interview, in my opinion. You know, how good are you at, uh, you know, or showing your ability to be able to do the job that you're applying for. Never bring in your personal issues, and then you never want to discuss anyone else in a negative light. Avoid all of that. Um, Show how you being a part of the team is going to enhance that employer, the company. Here are some questions that they could potentially ask you. A lot of this stuff would be early on in the interview, right? This is just to kind of warm you up and get you kind of more comfortable before you start answering the technical questions. But it's, what are your career goals, long term, short term? Sometimes this will come in the form of where do you see yourself in 5 years? And easy answer for that one as well. Hopefully, still with this company. That shows that you can be an asset to them. Why do you want this job? Just be honest. Strengths, weaknesses. When it's easy to highlight your strengths, but highlighting your weaknesses is difficult for a lot of people. And what you're really trying to do is show that, yeah, I do have a weakness, and this is what I've been doing to, get better at it. Um, how do you stay organized? If an, and then if a customer approached you and said X, what should you do, right? So that's going to fall a little bit more on the technical side, um, just knowing how to respond to those. In addition to that oral interview, like I said, we talked about the practical interview, and so that's where this comes from, right? Written questions. This would likely be on a practical, so they're gonna want to know, hey, what kind of, they'll find some kind of math problems, a scenario base. Definitely, something industry or regulatory, which is why you're taking this class, so you can learn a lot of this stuff, and be able to answer those questions. After the interview's over, they always give you the opportunity to ask questions of them. You don't have to ask any questions, um, but if you do have any, that are legitimate, I think it's a great opportunity to ask. You know, if you're having to ask what your responsibilities would be, um, you didn't read the job description, right? There's that is usually provided for you. Um, if you're asking, where would I be working, that should be, like they should be outlining like the department that you would be in. Again, something that should be on the job description, but you should know if you're going to be working outside or if you're going to be sitting at a desk, working in a lab, whatever it may be. Um, don't I struggle with this one, the advancements, right? Is there room for job growth is one way of saying it, but don't present it in such a way that, hey, I'm just looking to do this so I can go and rush off to the next thing. You don't want to, give them the sense that you're only going to be there a short time. Um, that just wouldn't work in your favor. You can ask about the team, who am I going to be working with? Can you tell me more about the people that, I'm going to be spending day in and day out with? And then if there's any issues with the schedule that you may have, again, that's another good time to ask the questions. Salary, again, it's highlighted in the job announcement. Um, However, if you are currently doing a lot of the tasks that you are applying to do, it is okay to say, hey, look, is there a possibility that, and this is usually after they've offered you the job and you start to, they say, hey, would you like the job? It's, yeah, can I negotiate pay at the moment? I understand that I'm, doing a lot of these job responsibilities already. Can I get, rather than starting at like, let's say an A step, is there a B step or C step that I can come in at, depending on the range of that salary? You definitely want to know if you are going to go down that route, it is a good idea to know what kind of is the industry average, um, and then be realistic, right? You don't want to say, hey, I can do all of this. I should be starting up at the top of the pay. They want to provide you with the chance to grow, so you're not going to start out at the top. So when it is finished, these are a couple more questions too. That after the interview, it's like kind of how, oh, hey, when do you expect to have a decision? Always be thankful for their time. You can follow it up with a thank you note. But then, what everyone does after every interview is think about how they did, what was their performance like, right? That's just standard, and that's good practice too. Because if you don't get the job, you want to kind of key in on the things where you can improve and then work on those. Obviously, how you dress is going to be a big part of it. If you are applying for like a field labor position, a lot of times they're going to be asking you to do a practical where you are going to be, working with your hands that day. So you don't need to have like a suit and tie it's understandable. You show up dressed for the position that you're applying for. Another way I was told to, that would help is that if you uh, dress for the next level of position, right? So you're basically not dressing up for that job that you're applying for or interviewing for, but what's the next level going to look like? How would you dress in that position? And sometimes, it just kind of gives it that extra effort. Um, but there's a lot of different ways you can dress. So long as you're professional, you're neat, you're going to be fine. Yeah. Um, Not to wear. not too formal, obviously. Uh, I don't think I've ever seen anybody wear a hat so far in all the interviews that I've had to conduct. Um, you want to have a nice haircut, and you don't have to be clean shaven, but trimmed up, cleaned up beard is usually helpful. You want your excessive jewelry put away. Obviously you want to have, nice clothes, but maybe not worn and torn. Mm. Yeah. Don't wear sunglasses. Real simple. Uh, like I said before, dress one or two steps above the job that you're applying for. It just kind of shows some kind of forward thought, but then it kind of, sets you apart from the other people who are interviewing. Obviously, I got a bunch of different colors in here, color schemes. You know, do what works for you, what you think will make you look good. Again, more grooming standards. Just this is kind of common sense stuff. Um, and take it with a grain of salt, but do what works for you, what you feel comfortable in for one, but what looks good. Women, yeah, I pulled this off of the internet. So you would know better than I am. Please take this with a grain of salt. Again, yeah, I all things that I've pulled from the internet. You would know better than I do. So please don't tear me apart if this is wrong. Please let me know if it is wrong. But I'm just working with what I got here. All right, hair should be neat and clean. Shoes should be in good condition. Right. You don't your fingernails should be trimmed if you have them. Um, you want to smell good, but you don't need to blow them away. Like walking into a perfume shop. Um, and your clothes should fit nicely. All right, we're getting back to that whole side, right? Best thing you can do for any job interview is be prepared, right? Be prepared is the only way you're going to get through it. All right. When it's over, it's all said and done, you've left. Sometimes I've seen a couple people who've sent in a thank you card. Um, and believe me, you remember that person. I can remember looking at it thinking, wow, this guy took the time to send us a thank you card. Doesn't guarantee they get the position, but it's a nice gesture because if the person they do hire doesn't work out, they may be reaching out to you. Um, if you don't get the job, right, these are some of the things that you need to pay attention to. What can you improve on? Yeah, if they call you and say, hey, we're sorry you didn't get the position, well, hey, what is there anything in your opinion that I could do to better my chances for the next time? Always be courteous and thank them for their time. Um, like I said, interviewing is a perishable skill. You need to practice it. It's something that, you know, everybody is going to have to go through it to get into this industry or to move up in the industry. And so here we go. Here's the STAR method that I mentioned much earlier in this lecture. The STAR stands for situation, task, action, result. And so what happens is they say, um, you know, please tell us about XYZ, right? Is there a time when you had a conflict with another employee and how did that end up, right? So think about the situation, okay? Was there a situation where, yes, a coworker and I had a disagreement about how to perform a certain task? The task was that we had to, let's just say, change out a meter, right? So he felt like we needed to do it this way. I felt like we needed to do this way. This is what took place. This is what happened, and this was the result. And that's a way of, if you can think in that sense, right? It'll carry you through your questions, prevent you from rambling, and sound coherent, right? And so that'll net you a better answer than just kind of fumbling through it. All right. So here's my track record. Right. On the left here, this is the number of times, and these are all the number of times I've interviewed, right? I've turned in applications multiple times, and been told, you're not moving on in the process. But what you see here is the number of times I've interviewed, right? So on the left here, this is the number of times I was not offered the job. This is you got the position that I applied for, the company I applied for, and not offered the job. As you can see there's that utility worker at Vallecito Water District where completely forgot about the interview. Um, and so they rescheduled for me. I came in and they were like, yeah, no. But then the times on the right there, that's the times that I was offered the job. As you can see, the first two, I was attending, taking classes at Palomar at the time. I was offered the job, and I did not accept it just because I was trying to get reps in, reps in on interviewing. I wasn't ready to get back out into the workforce. Um, so, but then, you can see, I'm shooting at about 50% there, right? I was offered, or it's about a 50%, 14 on the left, 7 on the right. So not too bad, I guess. But then my little side note down there at the bottom on the right, um, it's a technique I use anytime I'm going into an interview. It helps to calm me down, right? You want to be prepared, right? That's been the core theme throughout this lecture. You want to be prepared. But if you can tell yourself to not care, it will calm you down, right? So be prepared, but don't care. Because if you go in there and you're like, if I don't get this position, I'm, gonna freak out. You're not gonna, get through it smoothly and confidently. So just a little technique that I use to prepare for myself. Anyway, with that, that is the last lecture that you have in this course. The next thing that we'll do is the review, and that'll wrap up this semester. All right, bye.